In a matter of just 10 days, the Cubs have tripled their chances at making the playoffs, but it could all be for nothing if they don't take care of business this week. Let's explore that right now here on the Setup Man podcast. Setup Nation, Cubs fans, man, I am excited to be with all of you today after the Cubs have gone 8-2 in their last 10 games. They look like a real team, aside from, some wins that they barely squeaked out against the White Sox, which, by the way, even though you win all four games against the White Sox this year, they've all been ugly. I was at two of them, and I can tell you, if they were playing 28 other teams, they're probably 0-4, but instead they're 4-0. So lucky that they were playing the White Sox, lucky that their schedule for the rest of the year is against teams not as bad as the White Sox, but it's not a whole lot tougher. And for that reason, there's a lot of hope. But again, today we are talking about, is this a make or break week for the Cubs? Make sure that you comment. Make sure you let me know what you think. Am I being too dramatic? Is this not a make or break week for the Cubs? Do you think because of their tough schedule that they do have a lot of chance to be able to make up ground, even if they can't do that this week? And also make sure you're subscribed. We are having a ton of fun making daily content on almost a daily basis here for the Cubs here in the 2024 season. Got some big things planned for the offseason as well. Can't wait for you to see that coming up. All right, so let's first of all give you a standings update, because a week ago, 10 days ago, this was a much different story. Here's the deal. On July 30th, the Cubs had a 3.5% chance of making the playoffs. Now they are at a 9.4, 9.6, depending on which day you're looking at, chance of making the playoffs. That means they have basically tripled their chances of going to the postseason. Now today, the Cubs are sitting pretty at just 3 games back, but 10 days ago, let's start there, July 30th, here's what the standings looked like. You had the Braves with a half a game lead in the wild card. There was this kind of jumbling of the Braves, the Mets, and the Padres all right up there at the top. The Cubs lost their second in a row on July 30th to the Reds. They were 51-58, 7 games back, 7 games under 500, 6 teams ahead of them for third place in the wild card. And the Mets were really trending up hard. I mean, you know their story this year. Grimace shows up. They signed a Latin pop singer, and all the things happen for the Mets. But as you'll see in a second, they've kind of come back down to earth. The Padres and the D-backs were on fire. That hasn't really changed much. The Pirates, the Cardinals, the Reds, the Giants, they were all playing pretty average ball. But all of that was still ahead of the Cubs. And on July 31st, the Cubs demolished the Reds 13-4. And since that game, they have been on a run. They are now 8-2 during that span. And they're arguably the hottest, if not one of the 3 hottest teams in Major League Baseball right now. They're only 3 games back of third place and only 4 teams in front of them, where there were 6 teams in front of them. So the Pirates and the Reds have fallen off. They're now behind the Cubs. The Pirates literally can't win to save their lives. They've lost 7 in a row. The Reds are still playing pretty average baseball. They're 4 games under 500. They have won 5 of their last 10. The Diamondbacks and the Padres just continue to be unstoppable. I mean, I don't know what in the world both of these teams took right around July 1st, but they have been unbeatable here during the summer. The Braves are human. We're going to talk about them in a little bit, but they are actually not only human, they are well on their way to potentially being an under 500 team if they're not careful. 3-7 over their last 10 games. Cardinals and the Mets have cooled off. They have just about a 1.5 game to 2.5 game lead over the Cubs, depending on which team you're talking about. The Giants randomly are playing well. The funny thing about all this is that the Giants and the Cubs were the ones that were pretty much vocal about, hey, we're not going to be buyers at the trade deadline. And here they stand, being 2 teams that are actually making a push for the playoffs when you didn't expect that at all. And of course, the Cubs did make some moves, but they were really focusing on the 2025 season, but those have already paid off. By the way, if you haven't looked yet, Christopher Morel compared to Isaac Paredes, we're not going to get into that right now, but just go look at the numbers. And all of you that, said, hey, I don't want Christopher Morel to leave, and then he hits 2 home runs the first 2 games with the Rays, and you say, see, I told you so, you shouldn't have gotten rid of him. Go look at the numbers. You're going to be happy we have Paredes. But let's go ahead and highlight now, what have the Cubs done over their last 10 games? So they're 8-2 over the last 10, 287 batting average, which is leaps and bounds beyond better than what they were doing before. 337 on base percentage. How about a 506 slug? They are hitting extra base hits at a really awesome clip, about 4 extra base hits per game, 41 extra base hits in those 10 games. How about 15 home runs? That's what you want to see more of. Almost 6 runs per game, 5.9 per game, and a 3.10 ERA, which is exactly what you have been seeing all season long, right? Aside from some ups and downs with the bullpen, the ERA, the pitching has been pretty solid. And then you've got some of these guys that are finally starting to hit how you expected them to hit. Now, I'm going to go over a few performers here. None of them are playing at what I would call MVP level, or like, hey, this is the best week of the season. They're not going to get any better than this. A lot of these guys can continue to put up these paces, or at least just barely off these paces. If we get that, if we can see this team continue to score 4 or 5 runs per game, this team, no doubt, can win 70 to 75% of their remaining games with the schedule that they have, which once again, we'll come up and talk about here in a bit. But how about PCA? 343 average, a 904 OPS, 4 stolen bases. He's 23 for 23 on the season, which has been a lot of fun to watch. Only 4 strikeouts in his last 37 plate appearances. You hear Craig Counsell talk about it. You hear the media talk about it. He's making better decisions at the plate. He's not chasing as much. He's driving the pitches that are in the strike zone. That's what's been the difference maker for PCA. But we are going to do a little bit of a progress report. Make sure you check that out later this week. I'm going to talk about what's been working well for him, what's kind of been the change, what's been the reason for the change, and some of the kind of breaking down the swing of why he's been doing better at the plate. So make sure to look out for that. We're going to probably come out with that Wednesday or Thursday on the YouTube channel. Cody Bellinger, 343, 928 OPS, and how about 2 home runs out of him? Again, we saw the run that he had from really July all the way through September last year. It was right around that that plus 300 average, that plus 900 OPS, and hitting a couple home runs per week. Not out of this world to see him continue that pace. How about Dansby Swanson? 361 average, 867 OPS. When Dansby was at his best last year with the Cubs in that first half, he was hitting singles to the right side. When you look at Dansby's last 10 games, he only has a couple doubles. He doesn't have any home runs. It's just a very consistent getting on base, scoring runs, hitting that ball to the right side. You want to see Dansby continue to do that. Nico quietly doing really well over the last 10 games, 310 average, 4 stolen bases, 10 runs. That's exactly what you want to see out of him. He has the occasional slug, but that's not what you need out of him. You need him to get on base. You need him to score runs, a lot like Dansby. And you need that average around that, 280 to 300 is where you want to see Nico for him to be effective. He is walking more this year, but most of the time, because pitchers really attack him, you want to see him hitting that ball to the right side and getting on base via the bat. Michael Busch, 300 average, 997 OPS, 3 home runs. He hasn't had a ton of lows this year. He's had a couple stretches where he's kind of, looked a little bit lost at the plate, but he typically picks it right back up, and he's putting up a season that you could argue he could be a rookie of the year, or at least be in the conversation. And this last 10 games, no different. How about Miguel Amaya, though? I'm not going to go over the last 10 games. He's cooled off slightly over the last 10 games, but since the All-Star break, a 286 batting average, a 738 OPS, 7 strikeouts, and 47 plate appearances, which means he is swinging and missing a lot less, and he is still putting up solid at bats. He had his biggest hit as a Cub, arguably, against the White Sox with that 2-run single, the difference maker that helped the Cubs win 3-1. And this is what you're looking for out of a number 8, number 9 hitter. A 286 batting average with a above 725 OPS. You'll take that all day long. Most teams, including the Cubs, don't get any production out of their 8 or 9 hitters. And so for him to be doing that and batting in the 8th and 9th spot after the All-Star break has been huge for this team. So you look at all these guys and you say, once again, are any of these numbers maybe PCA? Maybe you say, okay, last 10 games, he's not going to be able to keep that up. We don't know yet because he doesn't have the track record. But all those numbers I just went over, can you see those guys having the same week, the same next 10 games? I can. I absolutely can. And you don't even need to. If they even cooled off just a little bit, that still is a team that you don't need them to score 5.9 runs per game like they have in their last 10 games. If they just score 5 runs per game, here's the wild thing, okay? If you watch this Cubs team, and if you've been tracking this, when the Cubs score 4 runs or more this season, they're winning 75% of their games. 49-16 this year when they score 4 runs or more. That's a 54 winning percentage. If they score 5 runs or more, they're winning 86% of their games, 43-7. So when you look at what has happened in the last 10 days, you don't say, well, everything is clicking. No, you just say, hey, the pitching has continued to do what it's done all season long. The defense is continuing to be solid. It's not playing at its best. It's not playing at its worst. It's just been really solid. And the batting, the offense, it's not like they're scoring 8 runs per game. 5.9 in 10 games is good. It's not amazing. It's very modest. So if they can just keep that up at like 4.5 to 5 runs per game, you're going to see them continue to be on this pace. In fact, since the All-Star break, if you look at this 21 games, they're 12-9. So pretty modest as well, but they were shut out 4 of those games. If you put up 1 or 2 runs in any of those 4 shutouts, you're potentially looking at 13 wins, maybe even 14 wins in that 21 game stretch, which is what they've done all season long. Again, 4.2 runs per game since the All-Star break. And if they're scoring 4 or more, they're winning 75% of their games. So I bring all this up to show you that this is not a major shift, right? This is not a team that has just gone out there and played their balls off, right? Like they're just doing what we expect them to do now. They've just risen to the occasion now that the weather's gotten warmer, now that they're noticing, hey, they've got a shot to actually do this thing. And now it's about starting to look at the scoreboard, right? It's being those games where you're looking and you're seeing, okay, yesterday, wow, the Braves lost, the Mets lost, all these teams are losing in front of them. What's the path? How do we get there? How do we get to actually a playoff spot? And that's what I want to look at just for a second here. So let's start with the Braves, right? The Braves are on a epic meltdown right now. On July 9th, the Atlanta Braves had a 4.5 game lead in the wild card. Since then, they are 10-17. They're barely hanging on at the 3rd wild card spot. They're 3-7 in August, and their team ERA is 5.07. This team has had a meltdown, not just because of injuries, not just because of underperforming offensive players, but that pitching has gotten hit hard ever since July 9th. And you look at the teams that they've been playing. This is where you were just like, oh my gosh, what's going on with the Atlanta Braves, who in my book, they were going to be better than the Dodgers. They were going to be better than the Phillies. They were going to be the best team in the National League. If you ask me, even with the Dodgers getting Ohtani, I thought the Braves had a more balanced lineup and balanced pitching rotation. They've lost series since July 9th to the Reds, the Rockies. They split with the Marlins, and then they got swept by the Brewers, which anyone could get swept by the Brewers being in first place. But you talk about the Brewers coming into your house and sweeping you at your home. That hurts. And I did a little bit of digging because I'm going to be honest, I don't really pay attention to a whole lot of teams until we start getting down to, are the Cubs actually in the playoff run? But, of course, everyone knows Ronald Acuna out for the season. Ozzie Albies got hurt, and he's out for quite some time. Michael Harris is out for a while as well. So those are 3 key players that the Braves are going without right now. But how about Matt Olson? This guy had a 54 home run season, over 130 RBIs this last year. This year, he's batting .230 with a .738 OPS. He hasn't had a full season under 800 as an OPS. I'm excluding COVID season 2020. He hasn't had an under 800 OPS season since 2018. That's how bad Matt Olson has been this year. And so when you look at the Braves, I mean, they're relying on guys like Laureano, like Whit Merrifield, like Zach Short to be in the everyday lineup. And man, when you're relying on those guys, plus your big dogs are underperforming, Marcell Ozuna is having a phenomenal season. Austin Riley's having a pretty decent season. But when you've got guys in there that you expect to be in the MVP talk and they're not even having a decent season, I mean, that's what we just mentioned there. Matt Olson is having a Ian Happ season. Ian Happ, I think, has a higher OPS than Matt Olson. And you don't have Ian Happ in any of those conversations. In fact, depending on the week, you either love or hate Ian Happ. That's the kind of season that Matt Olson is having right now. All right, so the Braves, I mean, I don't know. On this pace, unless something changes for them dramatically, I can honestly say not only do they not make the playoffs, I can see them being under 500 at the pace that they're on. The Mets, 6-9 in their last 15. They were swept by the Mariners in this last weekend series, and they only scored 1 run in 3 games. So this is a team that is starting to come back down to earth. Turns out the Grimace and a Latin pop star aren't all you need in order to win a wild card spot, but they're still right there beneath the Braves. The Cardinals, very, very average since the All-Star break, only 10-12 in the second half. Cubs took 3 or 4 of them. Should have taken all 4, right? And this is, not to say shoulda, coulda, woulda, but this is kind of the time of the year that you start to think of that, oh man, that one game that the Cubs should have beat the Cardinals, that one game that the Cubs were up 8-0 on the Padres. What if those games would have just went the Cubs' way? Now you're looking at a playoff team, and those are the games you start playing in your head, right? But again, as we break down these teams that are ahead of them, how about the Giants? The Giants have won 12 of 16. And again, they were a team like the Cubs that said, hey, we're selling or we're not buying. But when you look at these last 16, one thing I will say about the Giants is that, aside from the White Sox not being in this mix, they have had the easiest stretch of baseball in terms of opponents since 17 games ago. So in their last 16, they swept the Rockies. They took 2 of 3 from the A's. They took 2 of 3 from the Reds, who arguably are the best team in this group that we're talking about. They took 3 of 4 from the Nationals, and they took 2 of 3 from the Tigers. So a very easy schedule during that time. 12-16 is still very, very good, no matter who you're playing. But Giants can ride this, I think, for another 10 games or so, but the Braves, because they have the Braves, the A's, the White Sox coming up, and of course they're catching the Braves at a really opportune time. But after that, their schedule gets pretty difficult. So I don't know if the Giants can hold on. I don't know if the Giants are going to be part of the conversation. I think based on the fact that they sold Soler, they sold a few other guys, Cobb, I just don't see them being able to hold on. I don't know enough about them, but based on what I've seen from them the rest of the season, I don't think they have any of those star names that you look at and say that's scary. The Cubs, by far, for all these teams ahead of them, have the easiest schedule to end the season. 31 of the final 43 games are against teams under 500. I'll repeat that. 31 of 43 games. That means only 12 games of the last 43 they're playing against teams that are over 500. But coming up, they are playing a team that is over 500, and this is where I'm going to start talking about this week being extremely, extremely important. Because when you look at the Cleveland Guardians, which of course all have a special place in our heart, 2016, that's where the Cubs won the World Series. They will be playing in Cleveland this week. All the games are starting at 5:40 Central Time. We'll talk about who the teams are or the pitchers are that are going for the Cubs and the Guardians in just a second. But this is a team, the Guardians, who have been very, very streaky. They won 5 in a row, then they lost 7 in a row. Now they're back on a winning streak, quote unquote, at 2 games in a row. So which version of the Guardians are you going to get? I'll also mention that during that 7-game losing streak, I should say, they were playing really decent teams. So with that being said, you'd be happy to get out of Cleveland with a series win. A sweep would be just on a whole nother level. And now this media, this team is going to be talking about, wow, the Cubs go from a 9.6% chance of making the playoffs to now, wow, we're up at 20%. But I would be happy with a series win against the Indians. And you're looking at a pitching matchup that's extremely favorable for that. You've got Imanaga going tonight against Ben Lively. Now, Ben Lively has been really solid this year for the Indians. Mid-3 ERA, over 100 innings pitched. So this is going to be probably that low-scoring game. Then you've got Javier Assad, who's been a wild card kind of in the second half here. He hasn't really had any quote-unquote bad games per se, but he hasn't been reliable to go deep into the games. And there's no starting pitcher that has been announced yet for the Guardians, which honestly has not worked out that well for the Cubs this year when you think about bullpen games or that rookie that gets thrown in late last minute. It's actually gone quite poorly for the Cubs this year, but let's just hope that it follows history and says, hey, TBD means that they're either going to be doing a bullpen game or throwing in a rookie or throwing in someone that hasn't been all that good, maybe a swingman, and for that reason, the Cubs should take advantage. And then you have Tyone on the final game on Wednesday going against Alex Cobb, who is only making his second appearance of the year. He's been out much of the year with injuries. And his first start against the Minnesota Twins did not go so well. He's got an ERA now in the 7s because of that. And so this is a winnable series if you look at it, especially since the Guardians are just coming off of a 7-game losing streak. They're trying to right the ship a little bit. You can argue that they're due. I'm going to argue that they're really not playing their best baseball. And for that reason, the Cubs have a chance to take advantage. Now, if they come home after winning that series to play the Blue Jays for 3 games, Blue Jays are only 4-5 in August, or 10-12 since the break. They're under 500. If you can win this week, if you can go 4-2 this week and keep pace, because here's the deal. We're going to go over the schedule for the other teams in a second. If you can keep this pace of being at 3 games behind or maybe even better, the momentum continues to carry. If you go 3-3, if you go, God forbid, 2-4 this week and lose that momentum and suddenly you're 4 or 5 games back with less than 40 games less to play, that's going to feel like Mount Everest. I don't care how easy the schedule is. I don't care how many games under 500 the rest of the teams are. The Cubs have been known to play down to the competition. That's not even just a Cubs thing. That's just a performance thing in general, right? When you play the White Sox this year, the Cubs have played more like the White Sox than they have played like the Orioles, right? Then when you look at the Orioles, they go and they sweep the Orioles. They play up or down to the competition. I just mentioned 2 teams that they swept. They played up to the Orioles, they played down to the White Sox, and they barely escaped with wins against the White Sox. But when you look at, especially within the division, Cubs playing the Pirates, the Reds, they have not been good against those teams this year. So they have to take care of business, not just for the rest of the schedule, but just this week. Because if they are looking at a 4 or 5 game behind for that third wild card spot with under 40 games left to go, that is going to feel like Everest. And that's going to be a huge, huge climb up. So for me, I need to see this team at least still 3 games back in the wild card by the end of this week if this is going to be a serious playoff push. Fangraphs has them at 9.6% chance of winning and getting to the playoffs. I'm going to tell you what I think that is in a second. But when you look at the other teams as well, this is where it gets a little bit uneasy because the other teams that are ahead of them, the Diamondbacks, the Padres, the Braves, the Cardinals, the Mets, the Giants, they all have, for the most part, pretty easy schedules this week. The Diamondbacks are playing the Rockies and the Rays. The Padres are playing the Pirates and the Rockies. The Braves are playing the Giants, which will be tough for them, but then they're playing the Angels. The Cardinals have the Reds, beatable team. Then they have the Dodgers. Dodgers are playing decent right now, but they've even slid off a lot recently. Mets, A's, and Marlins. Giants, Braves, and A's. This is a week that you expect to see all the teams in front of you be at 500 or maybe even, I can absolutely see the Diamondbacks and the Padres sweeping and going 6-0 or 7-0, however many games they're playing this week. This is going to be a difficult week if the Cubs do not win this week. Is it make or break? I think so. I really do. I think if you go 3-3 or 2-4 and you are that many games back below the third spot, I think that makes it a nearly impossible. I think you're going to look on Fangraphs that next week and it's going to say a 4% chance of making the playoffs. They can stay at 3 games back and then they have that schedule coming up. I think your 9.6% chance of making the playoffs goes up to 12 or 13%. That's where I'm at. I personally think if it matters for anything, the Kyle Stanley Graphs playoff odds right now, 22.1%, just based on the fact that they have that easy schedule moving forward, based on how they're playing, based on the pitching still being strong, the defense being strong, and if the offense just continues to play average, I think this team wins 75% of their games the rest of the way, and they are finding themselves in that third playoff spot. What do you think? Let me know in the comments right now. Do you think this is a playoff team at a 22% clip, or are you above that? Are you below that? Is this a make or break week? Let me know in the comments. And as always, make sure you're subscribed, like, comment, all the things. I'm going to go put my arm on ice, Setup Nation. We'll talk to you soon.